and I'm going to be here to pick Ross's brain about this. The topic is going to be retailer and distributor marketing. So welcome, Ross.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. I'm glad that we can talk about all this good stuff. It's going to be good times.
Love it. So before we get started too, if anyone has questions as we go through, just feel free to drop it into the chat, wherever it's going to come up on our end, and we'll be able to answer it for you. Okay. So to get started, Ross, tell us about yourself.
So I'm Ross Thompson. I work at the Op or USAopoly, however we want to do that, right? And I'm a marketing manager there. And I've worked in games in the gaming industry for about 10 years or so, maybe 12, depending on what we want to count. So it's been a lot of fun, from working at a game store starting out, like volunteering and running events before that. I used to run a big gaming convention called Kingdom Con here in San Diego. And then I've worked at a handful of game companies, and I've been here at the Op for a good amount of time. It's super fun. And I just like working in games and doing stuff and promoting a bunch of cool things. So, yeah.
Love it. So you do a lot of things. You have a background in a lot of things. Okay, great. So we can kind of pick your brain from multiple angles.
Totally. Go for it.
Yeah. Okay. So to start off, for people who are new to the space, new to just like understanding how games get like distributed, how games get like, beyond the launch phase, tell us about kind of the difference between like retailers, distributors, and like how it all kind of connects together first.
For sure. So a cool way to look at it is it's kind of like a 3-tier, right? So from the publisher, manufacturer, right? There's the manufacturer that makes the product. Then there's the publisher, which is our game companies. And then of course, you cover so much digital marketing and DTC and crowdfunding and everything there. But there's a whole other side of the industry where from your game company, then traditionally you would sell to a distributor, and then the distributor would then sell mom and pop shops and local stores and everything there. So like where we go to a game store and buy games, they've probably bought that either from the distributor or they've bought it direct from the manufacturer or from the publisher. Right. So there's a couple different ways that kind of goes into it, which is helpful. So like after you've got your game and you're ready to go and you've already sold it to your backers on Kickstarter and you're selling it on your own website, you want to get it into game stores. And that's a big part of our industry. Even with COVID going on right now and everything there, game stores are still open. And then in a traditional setting, people can go into game stores and do all that. So.
Got it. Okay. So it all connects together. There's multiple tiers, as you mentioned.
Right.
And, crowdfunding and just the launch portion of it is just the beginning,
right?
I would say. Just like the very early, like very beginning of like a huge chain of like nationwide, worldwide things you could do to get your game out there. Okay. So what is the process to get even started after a campaign ends, right? After like, okay, you have funded. What is the first step?
So it's interesting, right? So I know you kind of brought up like now that you've funded Go, I would suggest that even before you've launched your campaign, you look at starting up some conversations with different distributors and everything there, because you may find yourself when the game is being made or you're looking at how you want to do it, that may not fit well for what a distributor wants or for what a retailer wants. And while it's easier essentially to sell direct to your consumer for some things, getting it in a game store is really important. And that's a big part of growing that brand, growing your game. So one of the first steps could be is calling a distributor, right? And the gaming industry has a lot of good ways to do that. We have our main organization called GAMA, which is the Game Manufacturers Association. They run a big trade show in March, which is in Reno. This year it's going to be digital. And they are a great way to connect with the different distributors that are out there. And setting up a meeting with them to talk about them, whether you're an indie or you're established and going forward, that's a big part of that. So they're Alliance, ACD, PhD, PSI. We can go into a bunch of other ones later in this thing, but those are all really good people that have been selling games to game stores for a long time. And you want to have that relationships and get those things going, along with all the networking you've been doing to build your marketing out and different things there, different Facebook groups. That's awesome. But there's a whole other side of the industry where you really want to talk and get going. At the same point, it's worth talking to some retailers too, right? And you want to find out what retailers are able to do that. And there's a couple good Facebook groups that are for that as well. I believe there's the Retailers Who Back Kickstarter's Facebook group, and they're a really good resource to talk and be like, hey, I want to get my game into retailers. And obviously, if you have a retailer tier, that's cool too. But making sure that you can get your game into distributors and then retailers is a great way to do that. So getting that initial conversation is a good way to get that going. Along with that, it's just kind of figuring out, there's a lot of resources that are already out there. So obviously we could talk about it forever, but at the same time, there's already good blogs and stuff on there that you can kind of research and get going. And then I would also suggest just kind of attending more of those shows. Obviously right now we can't do that, but like when you're at Gen Con, when you're at Origins, when you're at some of these things, those distributors are going to be there, those retailers are going to be there. Set up some meetings and just, hey, I just want to catch up and talk and see about, like, we have this game, I want to get introduced, and what would it look like?
Got it. I love it. So like making sure you do this again before you are funded on crowdfunding, right? Knowing this in the beginning.
Totally, because you may think that a really cool idea for your box back maybe to have this cool art piece or some of those things there. But, it's important to make sure you've got all your information. So if somebody that hasn't seen any of your marketing can pick up your box and see the back of it, what does that look like? What kind of material is your box going to be? What is the right size? Is it going to sit on a shelf okay? Is it going to stand up by itself? Does your spine to the side of the box, does it have all the right information on it? So you want to make sure that while the box top may look really cool and the back art may look great, you want to be able to make sure it will still do well on the shelf, right? And you got to keep all that kind of stuff in mind. And does it have a UPC code? Does it have all this, like all those little things that are really important that sometimes don't apply if you're just going to, sell it to your friends on Kickstarter? It's important to have that retailer reach. So
yeah. Those are, again, really good points. That was kind of the next question I was going to ask, actually. Like, what kind of specific things should you watch out for in order to prepare a game, not only direct to consumer, DTC, but also for distributors and for retailers? And you touched on some of the things like the box.
A couple of those things, right? And that's a good question too, because I think crowdfunding is used to help provide the money so that you can raise the money for your game, right? And at the same time, of course, your initial pledges and everything on BackerKit and all your back-end pledge managers, that's going to tell you how many you want to produce. But at the same time, if all that money goes into production and then you've done, and then a distributor goes, hey, we want to pick up a few thousand units or a couple hundred units or whatever we want to get for a thing, and then you don't have any, you didn't prepare for that, right? And so you could have ordered a whole bunch more of your game ready for it to go into distribution to retailers. And if you didn't prepare for that, then you're kind of out of luck. Right. So that's a big thing, too, is talking to those people that want to buy your game in bulk, knowing that beforehand is going to be very helpful.
Got it. Okay. So like knowing, again, not only just like how it will look on the shelf, but also knowing like quantity, volume of the thing, of like how many people need in order to put it into distribution, too, because it's a much larger order than just direct to consumer, one person, one game. Oh, I think we just lost you, Ross.
You back?
Yes, you're back now.
Yeah, my internet did a little hiccup. So, but yeah, that's super important. Is along with making sure the game itself looks good and looks good for all of that, making sure you have enough too, right? The whole point of the crowdfunding is to raise money to get the game, and so keeping that in mind, right? And so that can be formed from, hey, like if your marketing is picked up and some distributors are interested, making sure that you can get kind of an initial order quantity from them, and then maybe they'd be interested in picking it up so that you can put that in your print run. So when it gets shipped from your manufacturer, you're good to go.
Yeah. So from here, right, games don't just sell on shelves by like within a vacuum, right? What are there kind of things that a publisher should prepare for distributors or retailers in order to help these games sell? Like how does the marketing part come into all of this?
And that's a great question. And there's so many things you can do. And it's kind of funny. The wheel has been invented to a point, but at the same time, you can still do so much more. Some of the bases I like making sure that we have covered when you're doing this is having a nice retailer kit. And this is going to include things like PR shots. It's going to include things like game information. So like basic game, like what's your game description? How many players? How many things? Like you want to make sure that the retailer and your sales rep at the distributor can just pull it up really quick and know all your basic stuff, right? So that sales sheet and that little solicitation form is going to be really important, right? It's going to have a nice little paragraph or so about what the game is. It's going to have nice little call outs and things. You want to have a nice one sheet that you can just kind of promote into your game and go, here's what my game is about, all this stuff. So kind of in the same way when you're pitching your game to get designed and you want to get it picked up, that same kind of mindset applies to when you're making a sales sheet so that you can show off to distributors and retailers, hey, here's what this game is, and you want to include some cool shout outs and stuff like that. So that the sales sheet's very important. And then having a nice retailer kit that includes PR shots. And then a big thing that's been included more now has been pre-made social media graphics. So if you can include things like that they can share on Facebook and they can share on Twitter or Instagram that are already done, that's really important too. For a lot of the stuff we do with the op, we love making sure that we have nice showcase images and lifestyle shots for the game as well. So here's a family playing our game, and here's really cool board game photography. And there's so many good board game photography people right now too, that having some nice photos of your game really goes a long way. And so why, of course, you want it for your own social media purposes, being able to provide the retailers or distributors with that information too is really good.
Got it. Okay, so just to reiterate here, like our retailer kit with all this information all prepackaged already, including like social media, like pictures, for example, that they could use to help promote the game too. A sell sheet that illustrates all the information of the game itself at the ready, so that it makes it easier for people to look at it, understand it, and understand why they should have it too.
Oh, yeah. And if you want to look for some good examples too, the op games on our website, we have some nice rundown. Pandasaurus has a really good rundown too, and so does Renegade, if you want to go and check out like their retailer information. And it's got some good examples of what you can do to kind of promote your game that way and get it ready for retailers. Another good thing, we can go on for more retailer marketing, but back in the world when we could all gather in person, and people were playing games at that, having nice little organized play kits for your game, right? And being able to promote people to go into the store to play your game. So I know we always talk about how little swag things and promo cards and all that fun stuff like that. I always kind of keep, where are they? I've got some like Munchkin bookmarks, right? Like we always use these cool things. So they have those available at the game store. A couple of years ago for the op, we did like this Die Hard candy bar, right? And so having cool things, right, where it promoted the whole game and everything. So, but having these little kits you can send out. So like with the op, we have a quarterly kit we'll send out to retailers who are on our preferred program, and they'll have promo cards for our Rising games, and they'll have little promo packs. And so we can let consumers know on our social media, oh my gosh, check it out. Like we have these things, and that'll encourage, hopefully, people will want to go and get the promo cards. And so they got to go to the game store to go do that. It's a tried and true tactic. People have been doing it for years. Most games that have promo packs,
I think we're losing Ross again. We lost you for a second there.
Got roommates, we're all on the internet, right? So
got it. Okay.
So, but yeah, so I'm saying like at the tried and true tactic is like retailer kits are really helpful, and then organized play kits are really cool too, right? Like obviously, like a good example of ones that are very successful is like Magic the Gathering with their Friday Night Magic, right? Like people go to game stores. Well, back in the old world, people went to game stores to go play Magic on Friday, and that was a big thing to help promote the game and do all that. So creating some extra buzz in play around stuff for your games is really cool. And so there's a lot of fun ways to do that. Special events, cool cards, like those kind of things are really helpful. And retailers like seeing that too, because the more you can do to support the retail stores, the more you're going to want to build that relationship, because they're almost a partner with you alongside selling your game, right? Of course, it's you want to sell it where you can, but at the same time, building a good partner with the retailer stores goes a long way.
Yeah, I love it. There's a lot of like tips and tricks that you kind of rolled out here, and I'm myself taking a lot of notes. From here, this is making me think, right? Like strategically speaking, it seems that the getting things into retail and distribution is, again, very important, because just the volume and the reach that distribution and retail stores have, right? When you're online, when you're on selling direct to consumer, one piece at a time, one game at a time, it's a lot slower, and you have to spend a lot of your own energy and budget in a way in order to get to that one customer. with a reach of retail and distribution, it might go even a lot wider than you first initially anticipated. So from here, how would you kind of recommend publishers, indie publishers, new game designers, new creators to like think about the whole space? Like, where should they be focusing their energy on, and how should they be spending a lot more of their time in a way?
So that's a good question, and it kind of comes down to is what is the goal for your game, right? Are you just going to do a nice game? You're going to make, you printed it, awesome, and then you have extra copies in your garage, and then you're going to sell them as is, right? And do that ever. But it's like, if you want to grow your brand and grow your game and get out there, it's getting on that phone call and calling up those people. There are reps and there's cons and there's all these things that are built around getting your game out there and making it happen. Like there's what, 5,000 games coming out a year, right? So you're going to be competing alongside all the latest and greatest, just like how you are on Kickstarter and everything else. That shelf space, you've got so much, but it's really cool seeing a game that you've designed from all the way there to get on the shelf. It's always fun. I love when we get to work on a game and then I go to the local game store to go buy some paints or a game, and then I see the op games on there and it's like, that's our stuff. How cool, right? So it's kind of just getting out of that zone a little bit, right? So in the same way you would build to get ready for your Kickstarter page and get everything prepped there, it kind of goes back to that sales sheet and getting that going on. There's so many tools that are in the industry already, and it's just kind of like people from the distributors, they want to meet you. They want to get this going. Of course, there's a bunch of indie games out there and going on, but if you want to make it happen, it's just making that connections happen and getting out there. And I know it's not the best advice where it's like, well, just make the phone calls, but it's like part of it just comes down to that, right? And so and there's people that want to get that going. So that's a big part of that, is kind of figuring out what's your goal. And if you want to make that happen, do the legwork and go to the shows and, figure out more of that percentage too, when you kind of get to figuring out, well, how much is my game going to sell for at retail? Because distributors are going to take a cut, retailers are going to take a cut. They're all going to do that. So you're not going to get that same MSRP that you would normally selling it direct. So
yeah, let's talk about that a little bit more too, like pricing, right? How do you like deal with pricing? Because as you said, a game MSRP, game costs this much to make, there's cuts along the way. What kind of things go into like how someone should conceptualize pricing, right? Because there's also crowdfunding and potentially discounting for crowdfunding. And there's all these other things that you have to think about.
Right. So it's interesting when it kind of gets down to that, right? And the distributors like buying at that 60 to 50% off kind of thing, right? So they're going to buy it from you and go that route. Retailers, if they're buying direct or whatever, they have that 40% off kind of thing, right? So they aren't buying it at full MSRP. They're buying it with that discount in mind. And you have to think that way too. And a good way to picture that is my suggestion is try to sell it and how many come in a box, right? So you don't want to do a one-off of your game or a two-off of your game. How many come in that box set, right? What is the quantity? Are there 5 in a box? Are there 4 in a box? Figuring out that much, because they're also looking at shipping, right? And at a certain point, when do you cover shipping? And when does your distributor cover shipping? Because retailers are going to be buying from their distributors at an amount that hopefully gets them free shipping, right? So you've got to consider all that too. And there's a whole process behind that as well. So when you're thinking about that, those are obviously, you're already thinking about, well, my shipping to backers is going to be this amount, so we're cutting in that there. That same kind of process goes into planning when you're going to be selling to a distributor or selling to a retailer, because the distributor is going to be selling to a retailer at a certain discount, and they're going to want to make sure that the retailer is hitting the limit that it is so they can have the free shipping and all of that. The turnaround time isn't everything there. So those are all stuff that you've kind of got to think about when it hits that. And so it's usually in that 50 to 60% when doing distributors, and then 40% when going to retailers. So that's the general standard, but it also is always changing depending on what's going on. So it's kind of important to keep an eye on that.
Got it. Okay. And when you're talking about like distributors and retailers, right? You mentioned some names when we first got started. Right? How do you suggest someone start figuring out who to work with in general, right? Or is it just like kind of call the top names, or is it specific distributors for specific games, for example?
So that's a great question. And it's very interesting how that all works, right? So our industry we have some giants that are in distribution that have been doing it for a long time, right? And so Alliance Diamond is one of the biggest and oldest ones. They also do Diamond Comics, right? And so Alliance Games, they've got warehouses that are all over the US, and they're one of the biggest ones right alongside ACD. And they cover a lot of different stuff. One of the cool things they have too is you want to look at what does the distributor provide. Of course, they have a huge amount of sales reps, and they've got a lot of store clients, but also what additional support do they have, right? So Alliance has GTM magazine, so it's Game Trade Media magazine, and that magazine goes to retail stores, allows them to order and do all those things there, which is great. They've got GTM Media, which is their marketing digital end of things. They do live streams, they do painting things at shows, they'll do a booth and everything there. So that's a really important thing. They cover a lot of different stuff, but something to think about as well is, do they have exclusives with different companies, right? So, because there's some companies where they go exclusive with a couple of distributors instead of going with everybody. So that's important about is, okay, this partner who I'm getting with, do I already have an idea of where their priorities may already lie? Because I may only have 1 or 2 or 4 games with them, or they're working with partners that may have the whole line. So that's something to think about, right? So Alliance is a really good one. And then you've got ACD. They're another great one, and they've been doing a lot of stuff for a long time as well. And then from there, it kind of goes down, right? So you've got GTS, you've got PSI, you've got PhD, and there's a bunch more I could list and go down. So it's kind of cool to find that out. An interesting way, if you want to find out more distributor lists out there, is I would recommend to go to Gamma on their site, and they have a list of all their distributor partners, and you can find out who's going there. And with the upcoming online show as well, you could see who's going to be attending and giving seminars and giving speeches. And you could, hey, we set up like a 15-minute meeting, because right now everybody's doing what we're doing right now, but phone calls, right? So I'm on probably a couple calls a week, just catching up like we would at a show. Hey, what's going on? Doing everything there. Toy Fair is happening right now too, digitally, right? So sales reps are talking to buyers and everything. So right now is a good time to prep and kind of get that going, because there's so many different distributors that do a lot of things where they focus on the big games, or they focus on indie games, or on paints and hobbies, or accessories, or different stuff. So it's finding, kind of which one's the right for you. And I'm a big fan of having that nice relationship where we're friends, right? Of course, we do business and everything there, but finding that one step more than just a transaction is helpful, especially if they're going to be essentially a branch of your game, right? Because now they're going to be representing you when selling to retailers and distributors. So that's an important part of that whole process.
Got it. Okay, so making sure that, again, just to reiterate, having that core relationship with people in the industry who do this distribution work, so that you're able to understand what they need as a distributor, and if what you need also fits in with that, and to be able to kind of like leverage that relationship moving forward too for any future games.
Totally. And obviously right now with COVID, it makes it hard to travel and do all these things, but a lot of these distributors, they have shows where they have little trade shows where they're like little 2-day things, and they're not a normal consumer show where like a Gen Con, you're going to go for 5 days, the hall's open from 10 to 5, and then you're going to go play games like the ACD trade show is in Madison, Wisconsin. It's a 2-day show or a 3-day show, and the hall's only open from 10 to 2, right? So you're only going to be at your booth for a couple hours, and then there's going to be meet and greets and the game nights and dinners and then just hangouts. And that's when you get to meet with our sales reps, meet with different retailers, and do these different things. And so those kind of shows are really cool to kind of get your name out there and meet a lot of these people that own game stores that aren't online all day, and they aren't in the Facebook groups, and they aren't on Twitter. So they use Board Game Geek like IMBD, right? So they aren't in the threads. They go, oh, look, I saw this new game on a gaming magazine. I'm going to go read about it. And they're going to go to Board Game Geek, and they're going to look at the rating. They're going to look at the hotness and go, should I order this? Yes or no? Right? So while we're always focused on the influencer stuff and getting this stuff going and getting the assets going, there's other people within the same realm of our industry that only use a couple of these things, and they aren't as plugged in for all the different social media stuff. So it's always interesting talking to different retailers. Just kind of like, and they maybe they don't carry Magic, maybe they don't carry D&D, and you're like, oh my gosh, how does that work, right? Like, and so it's just interesting when they talk about all these different games and this stuff. So it's always interesting. There are new gamers all the time, and it's amazing how what people sell in their stores to keep it going, and it's really cool. So, yeah,
got it. So basically, it's kind of like from a launch perspective too. It's like getting your audience, know who your audience is. From like a retail and distributor perspective too, you kind of have to know that audience, what their needs are, where the promotional channels are, where they're getting information. Just like you were saying, like some people just read on a magazine or go to BGG and say, hey, this is what I'm going to order, right? So like understanding your audience from that retailer perspective in order to be able to create the content they need, right? For
totally. And to kind of continue on that too, another thing that's different from Kickstarter marketing to retailer marketing is you're not just focused about that 30-day window, right? Or that 2-week window. It's that continued sales, right? Mm-hmm. So you're going to have your stock that you're selling to distributors and retailers direct so they can get it out. And then you've got that secondary bit where now retailers have it on shelves, right? So what marketing can you provide them to help them sell their stuff? It's going to be over a year. So it's not just going to be during my campaign where you're hyper focused on how can I promote the campaign, but now you've got it on shelves. So now how are you going to promote people going to store shelves to go buy that there? And how are you going to sell it to promote on that back end? So it's a much larger process than just trying to hit this. So it's like you can get your reviews out and you can do these things, but maybe you want to stagger it, or you want to have a larger campaign, or you want to, hey, this month we're going to be doing a promo card that's only available at stores. You got to go there and do this thing. And then when the holidays come up, you want to see about getting it on gift guides and promoting it that way and everything there. So it's kind of a whole process. So it's yeah.
I love that you brought that. 'Cause at the end of the day, right? Like when it's in retail stores, what people care about, who are retail store owners, again, are turnover of the game, turnover of the inventory, making sure that the inventory turns over really quickly. And the way to do that is from you as like a publisher standpoint to support those activities, just like you were saying, to bring in, how do you bring people from online or from game groups into a store and have them actually buy something? So it's really, again, important to think about those long-term consequences, because at the end of the day, it's that repeat, right? So from here, how do you kind of think about, again, inventory turnover? How often people have to how do you make people want to reorder from you again?
That's a good question. So part of it comes down to, does your game have that, I don't want to say like survivability, but a little bit. When you look at the greenhouse and the foundation games that we have in the industry, right? Like Catan is always selling, Ticket to Ride is always selling, Carcassonne always selling, and then when a new game kind of hits that threshold, and you're like, cool, you're always picking it up. Like, what is it about those games that does really well? Like, so Telestrations and Blank Slate for the op are games that people are always picking it up. It's been going on forever. It's great, right? It's a good classic. People love that kind of stuff. And having your game hit that boat is really neat. And so it's trying to kind of figure out if that's your goal, getting it to that point, right? And so like, look at Codenames, right? Like they did the run. They went to shows. They played it off. They made it happen. They built that community following. And then from there, once it got into stores, it picked up and it was huge. Then it got into Target and then it was huge. And now it's still going. Like, that's still one of the games that you can bring to a regular party and people are going to want to play Codenames, right? So it's trying to figure out how can you promote your game in a way that makes people are always going to be wanting to find it. And I think one of the best ways to do that is to keep creating fresh content, right? So having new photos that are putting things up, doing new campaigns, finding new channels that are doing these how to plays or playthroughs, new markets that are doing stuff. We focus so much in the hobby industry on like the same 30 channels, right? Board Game Geek does a great job of doing that. Dice Tower does too. But there's so many new folk that are discovering games every day, and there's so many ways to do that with Twitch and with TikTok and everything there. And so it's finding those varieties that will kind of get that going and that help. And then at the same time, including in your copy, make sure to go buy it at your local game store. Make sure to go buy it at these things, and kind of pushing that in is very important. right? At the same time, kind of jumping a little bit, so I'm a little over the place, but like on your website, like having a where to buy, and then having, here's the stores you can buy it from. Having a store list is crazy hard to manage. And for the companies that do it, I give props. It's great, but having like a where to buy is helpful. And hey, if you're a local store to carry it, have them contact us and we can reach out and do these things. And so the more things you can do, I know we've talked about a lot of tools so far, but essentially it's just more of that promotion and doing those things. And so you may have sold out on your end, right? And you're waiting for the next print run, but the stores still have it on their shelves, right? And so how do you want to promote that going? Because they're going to be your ambassadors going forward as well, right? Oh my gosh, if I had a great time playing Blank Slate at a game store, I'm going to go and tell my friends about it and do those things. Where did they get it? They bought it at the local mom and pop shop. Awesome. That store sold out. Cool. I sold out of Blank Slate in 2 weeks. They're going to call up their distributor. They're going to order again, right? And their distributor is going to wait until they got a certain amount. Then they're going to call you up and then pick it up. It's a cycle, right? So it's how do you keep things fresh? How do you do these things? And those are important things to think about. So
got it. So it's again pretty much like consistently investing in not only creating, like you said, fresh content, but also figuring out ways that new people can also join the pie of purchasers in a way, right?
Totally.
My friend might have 7 Wonders and I don't have 7 Wonders yet. I love the game so much that once I play, I now want to go to the local game store and buy it.
Totally. And that kind of same thing applies to getting the new retailers too, right? Because certain distributors are going to hit certain retailers. But if you want to reach out and do that, there are ways to do direct retailer marketing through the distributor magazines and through certain stuff there and certain industry sites. Like I know we all cover Board Game Geek and Dice Tower, but like ICV2 and Mojo Nation and Toy Book News and some of those things, those are other ways to kind of help get that extra reach and go there. And I recommend, I know I've been saying it a lot, but like there's like with Gamma and some of these retailer groups, going to some of these presentations and trying to be a part of that and being able to present what you've got going on and being a part of those game nights. Like you may think, oh my gosh, I'm at a game night. There's only 100 retailers here. What am I going to do? But if you're the game on that table where all the retailers are and they're having a great time, hollering and having a hoot, like that's a well done trip, So that's something to think about when you're doing that kind of thing.
Yeah, and a lot of the things we're talking about here, is this like just local to the US, or is this kind of what it's like worldwide too? Can you kind of speak more about that?
So that's a good question. International games are blowing up right now, right? Like obviously when you look at things like Essen Spiel, and I went to that last year, so not 2020, but 2019. And I've been to a lot of shows. That's my first Spiel, and it's huge. It's huge, like, and it's massive. And I got Comic-Con here in San Diego, and like it was a big show. And you see all these different games, and there's all these, different localizations for Polish and German and French and Italian and all these different things. And they're the same games we're playing over here in the U.S., but they want to get it going. And all these different countries have their own games. Like Poland is really big into Talisman, and all these different things there. So it's trying to figure out. But like Hogwarts Battle for us went into German 2 years ago, and it's been blowing up. It's doing great, right? So it's that same kind of thing where finding those distributors in those localization places and getting out and getting your game, that's all good stuff. And so it's what it comes down to is you got to do the math and figure out, is it worthwhile for us to have them buy X amount of quantity at this rate to then get that going? And sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. So that's on your math end. You got to figure that out. But at the same time, for all the US, on the international, totally, it's a growing market. And I'll say this now, I'll go on the record, like China and India too, like they're blowing up for board games as well, and I know we don't really kind of go into that as much. We think very, very Eurocentric when it comes to board games in the US, but all the markets over in Asia, they're really getting into board games too. Japan's blowing up right now with board games, the Japanese game market. Obviously, Oink Games did well with their Kickstarter, and so there's more games that are happening. Games Workshop's doing a lot more with their game stores in Japan. So is Magic the Gathering. So kind of looking at those trends and being like, well, if they're doing it there, Obviously, other board games should be doing that. I always like watching and seeing what Simon's doing with their Simon shop out in Singapore, right? So, which is like kind of a cool way. Someday I want to go to that. I want to go to their shop. So
yeah. It's funny that you mentioned like Asia in particular too, because growing up, I grew up in Thailand, and growing up, there were no games, right? It wasn't something that we did as, hobby, free time. No one played games. But now, I go back, or I look back on social media, see what my friends are doing, and everyone's playing games now, right? Everyone's playing Splendor, playing Catan. Everyone's doing that now, and I'm like, okay, well, this is starting to move towards outside of the Eurocentric world, just exactly like you were saying.
Totally, yeah. The Tabletop Thailand Facebook group, they are hilarious, and it's just funny. It's like, oh my gosh, like it'll be a new release for some new game property, and I'll be like in my Facebook group, and then all of a sudden their group will pop up and go, look at this thing, and I'm like, oh my gosh, same thing. And so it's great. It's really, really cool. There was a big article that just went up on Twitter today about how D&D in India is blowing up, right? And how people are doing everything out there, and their game nights are expanding. And it's like, of course they are, right? So it's, as we look more into localization and trying to get the games out there just out of English and everything there, obviously games that don't have a language barrier do well in those larger markets. But at the same time, those gamers are buying stuff from game stores, and they're getting it through distribution. And they're not always able to order direct from you through your shop, through your thing, because shipping is going to cost more than the freaking game is, So it's building that market and getting those networks going and getting all that going. So that's important to think about when you're getting your game going. Yeah. International games are there, just good times.
Yeah, well, no, that was a really, really great point about how to kind of approach things internationally, right? Like rather than just thinking local, there's a whole world out there. And with, again, a growing market everywhere around the world, more increased disposable income, increased interest in just this hobby in general all around the world. So this is really great. So from here, right, as a game designer, a lot of people who are watching this are probably indie game designers, probably just getting started, first game, getting their feet wet. How would you recommend them, beyond, pick up the phone and just calling people? Is there any like final tips that you would want to offer?
So I've said it a few times, but I'm going to say it again, is attend some networking and industry groups. And there are panels out there. There is reading out there. Like people are happy to help. Like that is their job in our industry, right? And so that we have industry groups that are around getting your game into retail stores and all this, and getting it into distribution. And there are people that want to do that. It's scary. And I get how it can be scary. Hey, I'm just designing my game. It's super cool. I want to put it on Kickstarter. We're all good to go there. But like our industry, like the gaming itself is based with that person-to-person connection, and that's same with that businessing is too, right? And so we've got these shows, and I know COVID's totally screwed all that up, but we're trying to make it work with this stuff. But there are groups you can join, and there are people trying to make it work. And so when you go to shows like Gen Con and Origins and some of these things, don't just think about it as I'm here as a consumer, or I'm here to pitch a game to a publisher. Think about, hey, while I'm pitching to a publisher, or we're doing a game design unpub, maybe I should get in some meetings with some of the retailers that are here, right? Maybe I should get in some meetings with some of the distributors that are here. And because all those same networks and friendships or relationships are going to go a long way for doing that. And there's people that literally their job is retailer support, distributor support, in doing these things. And so meeting those folk and learning more from them is helpful, because it's all part of the same hat on this different stuff. And that's just what it is. And so going to more of these shows, attending more of these seminars, and especially online, like I love what you're doing with the Kickstarter group and getting this information out there to consume. But at the same time, there are these things happening too with industry groups that are established that already have these things. So like take the leap out of a Facebook group and join some of these larger organizations and just make it happen. It's tough. It's scary. I get it. But I believe. So
where could people kind of join some of these industry groups, right? Is it on Discord? Is it on like a particular forum? Like where should people start looking to be on this conversation?
which is totally like, where do you look, right? And so I'm just going to throw it out there and say Gamma's a way to go for this one right now, because they've got a lot of helpful stuff. And even if you don't, like, just absorb them for their resources, right? Like, they've got a lot of these lists and these contacts of folk that are out there, right? And for retailers, we've already brought up the Retailers Who Back Kickstarters group on Facebook. That's a good one too. There's a couple other game industry groups in particular and that kind of stuff. They're all on Facebook right now. I'm sure there are Discords for that. I just don't Discord for that exact kind of stuff, but it's good. And that's what I would just kind of recommend, and get that reading going on and make all that happen. So
love it. And also, someone mentioned here that retailers talk to each other. So making friends with one opens a lot of doors to others. It really speaks to your point earlier, making those relationships, really just taking the time, having 15 minutes even to just introduce yourself, introduce what you're doing, understand more about what they're doing, can, really take you far.
It really does. One of my first jobs in the industry was retailer support at Privateer Press. I was like 2021. And there are retailers that I met going to those trade shows that I still talk to now, right? And it's like, oh my gosh, Ross, I remember you when you had hair, and it's like, I know, right? So, it's just cool because, like, there's the game stores are the backbone for the industry, right? And there's so many games coming out. We can't keep up with everything that's happening, but the more that you can create for tools wise and talking to them and getting going, they're going to follow you for your stuff. And that's just how it goes. So it's work, but at the same time, it's really rewarding. And there's so many cool stores that are out there too. It's fun seeing what they do with your game. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, you're scrolling through Instagram and there's your game on a game store's Instagram on their thing with somebody playing it. And you're like, how cool was that? Right. So
life is made, right? Check.
Right there. Boom, check. Yeah.
And someone said, here's another tip too. Gamma will share a membership list to other members upon request too. So that's another thing to take note of. Okay, well, Ross, thank you so much for, being on here and sharing all this knowledge and insights. I didn't know anything about this. So thank you so much for just, being here to enlighten me about this too. If people want to contact you, ask you more questions, where should they find you?
So you're welcome to hit me up. I'm on Facebook as Ross Thompson, and then I'm on Twitter and Instagram as Almost Kirk, like from Star Trek. And then, of course, I work for the Op. So if you would hit up the Op, we have a lot of cool things going on there. And I'm happy to be a resource. I also run the Tabletop Game Jobs group. So if people want to find more stuff there too, you're welcome to join that group and find jobs in the industry. So that's very cool too.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time. And again, really appreciate this. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on. Good luck, everybody.